Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the series where I'm recreating Murray's costume manner from Secret of the Mimic in Minecraft. In the last video, we took a look at the White Tiger tunnels and the Sleepy Moon basement, but today we're going to be moving on to the final area of MCM with the research and development floor. Before we begin, let me explain how all of you are wrong. Last video I went over all of the Tiger tunnels and the Sleepy Moon basement, but before I actually got started on them, I mentioned the layout of the different basements and how each one actually collides into each other, or they're completely disconnected from the main MCM. But since I'm trying to actually group them all into one build instead of separating it like what we see in game, of course I'm going to have to layer things differently than the actual MCM layout. Part of that conversation led me to bring up Nurse Dolly's hospital, which I said wouldn't be able to move because it's directly connected to the MCM, but a lot of you decided to challenge my take on that. And to those of you that did, first of all, how dare you? And second of all, let me show you how you are wrong. If we take a look at the in-game map of Secret of the Mimic, this is currently the bottom floor of the doll hospital right here. And there is a very important detail that I want to bring up that isn't the doll hospital itself, but rather this single object right here of this microphone. This microphone right here is the one that we see in the main security office and is loaded in throughout the entire game. And just like I brought up in the Doll Hospital episode, this elevator right here is much longer than it should be, because not only are there not 100 floors in MCM, but it also goes way above where the office would be. This is why in the Minecraft build, you can see that the elevator shaft is nowhere near as long as what we just saw, as it only needs to connect these two floors together, which aren't that far apart. Now I got a lot of questions saying, why can't I just extend the elevator down more? That way there's a lot more space in between the two floors and I can fit the other basements in between the two. And you know what? I'm glad you asked. This elevator is not the only way to go from the bottom floor to the top floor or vice versa, as the entire build is connected to each other. If we go over here, we can see that this part of the build also connects from the basement to the top floor right here, meaning if I were to extend the elevator, I would also need to extend this entire room down to be much longer than it actually is. The reason why this elevator is so long is because at the end of the sequence, we have to watch the Mimic go through its entire animation of getting out of the dolly costume and then jumping out of the elevator. Right here, you can see the exact staircase that I have been talking about. I cannot move this because it is directly underneath the storage warehouse. Again, these two basements here aren't even connected to the MCM, and I'm only doing this just for my own satisfaction, so them being in whatever floor relation to the main factory doesn't matter in the first place. But putting aside this amusing argument, this does actually segue me into my next topic, which is how I'm going to be connecting the Sleepy Moon basement to the theater, since all three of these areas are seen at one point of each other. Now I did end last video by bringing up a few suggestions for how I was actually able to do this. However, unfortunately, this is where I'm going to have to call out another set of viewers, as some of you suggested to do something that I take very personally, and that is to use mods. How dare you? The entire point of this series, and essentially my YouTube channel at this point, is to take the limitations of Minecraft and work around them to try and make things as accurate as possible. This doesn't just include recreating gameplay, but also recreating set locations from other games as well, just like MCM. Now don't get me wrong, is this a really cool feature? Absolutely. In fact, this is seriously impressive. Here I have the Immersive Portals mod installed. These builds aren't actually connected, and by going through the portal, I end up from one build all the way over to the other. This is really cool. I think this is a really cool mod. However, I will not have my reputation tarnished by using a mod in a vanilla build. In fact, it even says it in the project description, no mods will be used in the creation of this map. But after reading through all of the comments, I did finally land on the idea for how I'm actually go about doing this, and that is to, as a lot of people suggested and how I brought up at the end of last video, is to build a smaller recreation of the moon basement in between both the doll hospital and and the floor what we actually look down into. Now for over here, it's even more simple as there is a lot more space to work with here, and I could probably just simply copy and paste the entire 2 floors and just put them on top of this one right here. That way we're able to look up from this basement and see the 2 floors above it. With that being said, everything that we've just gone over has nothing to do with what I'm actually going to be doing today, but I wanted to start this video by going over those issues I had in previous videos to tell you all how I'm actually going to be working around all those problems. I want to end this segment off by clarifying that I'm not actually having a go at anyone in particular, I'm just having a playful argument with my comments. I've never actually had to call any of you out in a video before, so this isn't something you're used to seeing, so I just want to be very clear, I do appreciate all of your comments and suggestions, I just thought I'd take the piss out of it. Let's actually get on topic and take a look at what I'm going to be building in this video, starting with the CuppaTeaExe tunnels. I knew these would have to happen eventually, but I wasn't sure where and when. The where is because, very interestingly, and probably very expected at this point, these tunnels clip directly into the storage warehouse where the security office is. There has always been a few comments in almost every video saying, basically warning me that this was the case, and I never brought it up because I didn't want to spoil how bad it actually is. I will be showing you this after the time lapse. It is ridiculous, but I thought it'd be best to group this in with the rest of the R&D stuff because you can't access these tunnels without going to the R&D buildings. It's all part of the same ending, so I thought it'd be best to just group it all together, get that section out of the way first, then I can continue with the main research and development stuff. But that then leads us to the giant elevator platform underneath the main entrance, which reminded me a lot of not just the stage lift from Security Breach. I'm not saying that's the same area, but it also reminds me of the sinkhole from Security Breach, where you go down to Freddy Fazbear's pizza place. I'm not here to say that those areas are connected. I know that the Pizzaplex was built on top of MCM, but I'm not a theorist. I'm just giving my ideas of how fun things could be connected together. My headcanon, I guess you could say. But speaking of Security Breach, with this area, there was once again a lot of bright colors in a weirdly dark basement. I don't know how this game keeps on managing to do it, but with this room, I once again had to build my 3rd iteration of the giant Freddy head, which I'm going to assume is the same Freddy head that we see in Security Breach and Ruin. This time it's a bit more under construction, so there's more wires and other walls around it. It's not a completed skull, but it was really fun to do that again. It's like giving me a 3rd chance to build the same thing. I didn't want to do it the same thing every time, so I managed to make it a bit different, and honestly I think it might have been my favorite iteration of the Freddy head. But not only is it my 3rd time recreating the Freddy head, it's also my 3rd time building Five Nights at Freddy's 1 within the span of only a few years. I don't know how many times I have built this area in Minecraft at this point. It's actually the 11th anniversary at the time of recording this, so I guess it's fitting. Pure coincidence, but who would have thought that for the 11th year of Five Nights at Freddy's 1, I would once again be building another iteration of the FNAF 1 pizzeria. Obviously, this isn't the actual pizzeria that people would be visiting, this is purely just a test build, but it's still fun to see it. It all circles back around. Like 3 years ago, I built my gameplay map. A few weeks ago, I built a custom one on a live stream, and here I am again, building an official FNAF game with the FNAF 1 pizzeria inside of it. But if you remember those videos, I'm actually using different palettes of blocks. I mean, there's some things that are similar with the flooring uses calcite and polished blackstone, and the walls also start out by using cyan terracotta, then a red terracotta stripe, but on top of that, instead of just using all coral blocks, I'm mixing in different stone blocks like stone and andesite, and then mixing in coral with it. Coral is a really weird block that I don't get to use often, but it works very well with texturing stone, but I didn't use it as the main block this time because I feel like it's too dark compared to what we actually see in game. But what I do like are these dark hallways here on either side of the office, where instead of it continuing the same stone colors of the rest of the pizzeria, I really like the dark gray colors, especially with the red. It mixes together really well. It's not a choice on my part as I'm just recreating what's seen in the game, which is different than FNAF 1, but it is nice to see the same building taken in a different form while still giving off the same idea at the end of it. I cannot get used to just seeing the FNAF 1 layout underneath MCM. It looks so out of place, especially where it is positioned to everything else, you know? We went over how all of the basements are layered on top of each other, but I was honestly thinking that R&D would be the bottom floor. It's actually not. If we take a look at all of these next to each other, you can see it's actually kind of above the Sleepy Moon basement and way above the Tiger basement. Now, to measure how deep this actually went, I used this stage lift as my source of reference to follow from. So all of the tubes inside of it are actually a certain distance away from each other, and each one is a different size, with one of them being 3x3, one of them being 2x2, and then some smaller ones just being 1x1 like you can see here. So that's how I was able to get a reference of how far each one is away from each other. Then that would give me the idea of how deep this actually goes down, which then of course leads to the actual R&D floor itself. Going in order of appearance, we're going to start out in the security office because this is where we actually access the CuppaTeaExe tunnels. So this couch would lift up and then the vent would show up to let us go down into those tunnels. However, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the doll hospital is right here. And I knew this would be the case. I mean, the moment I started building this area, I immediately realized how on earth are those tunnels going to be able to fit here when there is an area in the way of it. What I wasn't expecting though was the way that Steel Wool was going to go around this, as this might just be the most out there stupid silly thing that I have ever seen in a FNAF game. Take a look at this. This is the storage warehouse normally. Everything is as it should be. However, if I go ahead and activate the CuppaTeaExe tunnels, you're going to notice that something changes. I can't really put my finger on it, but let's go ahead and take a look again. Something's off. Maybe it'll change once I unload the rest of this, and then go back up. Ah, I see. It clips into the storage warehouse. What annoys me most is that this vent actually exists in-game. It's in the area where we find the first conduit, but their way of going around it is just so... I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't. So because I obviously can't do this in Minecraft, what I've decided to do is build the parachute tunnel still directly under where the vent access starts, but it's next to the doll hospital, and it actually lines up quite well. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but it actually works pretty well by going around it. I got all of the tunnels to basically be one block or directly next to the doll hospital, but let's actually go ahead and go inside these tunnels so that way you can see what they properly look like. Now, all of them are almost 1.5 blocks tall, so that way we're going to have to crouch around the place. But eventually it does lead to a wider space where we are actually able to walk around the place. Right now, none of the gates are going to lift up to block my path, so I'm allowed to just walk around freely. And I gotta be honest, this was honestly one of the less exciting areas I've had to build. I gotta be honest, there's always going to be that one area that isn't really that interesting, and this is probably it, because it's just a 2-wide corridor with lots of brick and wood around the place. There's not too much going on here. It's a very exciting moment when it happens in game, but building this, I gotta be honest, this was probably one of the most or least exciting moments. There's an area later on in the game that I think did this a lot better. But then eventually it does lead to the vent that I was talking about, which of course is not allowed to align up with the one that's actually in the build. But what I can do later on is just set up some teleport commands. That way we do actually end up from point A to point B, and then we can end up here and go down the stage lift. Which I guess at some point is also going to have to be functional at some point, but that's just an idea for later on. Right now we are just focusing on the building side of things. This open tunnel right here is where Big Top would come out of and then chase us all the way down, where we then eventually make it to the airlock and the actual R&D floor itself. And like I mentioned, it's very colorful. I don't know what it is about these storage areas being some of the most exciting parts in the entire build, but speaking of exciting parts, I want to go ahead and take a look at this, the giant Freddy head, because I'm really proud of how this one turned out. It's probably my favorite iteration of the 3 that I've actually made. It is a bit smaller than the other ones, and I think that's intentional because the object itself in-game is smaller than the one we see in Security Breach. But I'm also really happy with how I was actually able to make this one, as instead of it being trashed with rocky terrain around it like what we see in Security Breach, this one is in a cleaner environment. It's not really clean, but it's in a more open environment, meaning we're actually able to see the details a lot better. Of course, we are still able to walk inside of it, activate the generator, which is when the stage curtain is open up, then we can walk out of it and then make our way to the next area, with that of course being the FNAF 1 Pizzeria. Now already you might immediately notice something that I've added in between the time-lapse and now, and that is of course the map art that I've put all around the pizzeria. I don't want to spend too long going over this, as I've done it many times throughout almost all of my FNAF builds, but by taking a map of a giant pattern that I've built over there, putting it onto an invisible item frame and then lining the walls with it, will then give me the pattern of the map that I recreated. There have been multiple times throughout this build where I could have used map art, but I really like using it for just the smaller details, so that way the main build is still made out of normal vanilla blocks, but then I can add in a few custom details like the checker patterns. Aside from that though, this is exactly what you would expect in a FNAF 1 layout, aside from all of the different props and decorations around the build. It's very in progress, which I really like because it's not a ruined version of a build and it's not an open version of the build, it's an under construction build, which is a very nice change because though it still has lots of temporary assets around it, you can see the general idea of what they're going for. Like the main stage is of course already up. There's interestingly a prize corner, which finally confirms that there is actually a prize corner in FNAF 1. There's all of the different stages and coves around the place, like this, which we know to be Pirate's Cove, but originally had Monty inside of it. And then there's another one over here, which is where Bug is going to be. And what I think is really interesting about this as well is that we actually get to see where the safe room would be. I assume this is the safe room. It is exactly where it is in the FNAF 3 minigames, right above the bathroom hallway. We have a smaller room right here, which is directly connected to this room here, which I'm not entirely sure why this would be here. It's a very small cove. It feels almost like a temporary put another character in storage for the time being while another one is out. But it's cool to again see a little changes in the FNAF 1 Pizzeria. It's not the same thing that we've been used to seeing for 11 years. There are some differences to it, and we're actually able to see the bathrooms. It's a very simple design, but again, it's just one of those things like after so many years, we finally get to see what some of these rooms look like. Another example is right here, which is the kitchen. Now, while I don't actually think that this is going to be the kitchen, that's just a theory of mine about Secret of the Mimic, but again, it's nice to see a more general layout of FNAF 1 compared to what we're used to seeing. But let's go ahead and make our way down to the end of the hallway past the supply closet where we find the Spring Bonnie animatronic, and make our way down to the security office where the main point of this entire build is the Mexus machine, or I suppose the Fiona machine. This is a bit different than my one that I designed in Ruined because not only is it a different design in game, but it's also 4 blocks wide instead of being 3 blocks wide, which I did actually have to work around, though I did do it intentionally by making this build be an even amount of blocks wide. Around it, I put all of the different monitors by putting stained glass inside of item frames, so that way it recreates Fiona's face, and I honestly think I did really well with this. Again, it's difficult designing smaller props like this, especially when there's so many details stacked inside of them, but I think that I got the idea across here really well, and I think it turned out really good. But let's now move on to the rest of the build, which I gotta be honest, I didn't actually outline fully when I got started on this. I wasn't sure to the extent that I wanted to get R&D done, as I could have just left it at the tunnels, the elevator, and the FNAF 1 Pizzeria, but I would have got it done so quickly and just left all of this for just its own standalone episode. I don't think that that was worth it, so I've decided to group all of this together, but what I didn't expect was how much more it would actually add. I went from adding just a small chunk to MCM to now adding a completely separate area. We'll take a look at the structures themselves once they've been completed, but right now I want to look at the layout of it all and how it connects back to the MCM. There was a few things here that I wasn't sure about, with the main one being how far away this is from the MCM facility. I already knew going into this that this elevator over here that leads up to the mansion is actually another teleporting elevator where the set piece is actually here, but the mansion is much further away. With that being said though, some of these roadways are much longer than they should be, especially as seen in game, which I gotta be honest, I'm not entirely sure how I managed to go about doing that. I aligned the in-game map and my map on top of each other, and they're pretty close in relationship to each other. The springlock suits are always loaded in, and I used those as a reference to follow from, and I'm not entirely sure how I managed to do this, but it's not a bad thing. It might not be as accurate to what we see in game, but what I do like is that instead of using a teleporting elevator, this is actually a lot closer to where the mansion would be. So I think that I might be able to get away with building the mansion directly on top of this elevator here, because these roadways lead much further than what's seen in game. The final thing is how this directly connects back to MCM, as there was something I knew since the very start, and that's that this road eventually leads to the doll hospital, but I didn't think that it would actually go inside the doll hospital itself. So once we get out of the chase sequence, we take the road all the way back to the factory, we end up in this room right here, walk up the staircase, and we're inside the retail showroom. Before that though, we actually visit a little bit of the doll hospital in its ruined state, which I didn't think was going to be the case. We come out of this door right here, then go inside this one right here, which completes the track actually, which I find really cool. If you use the in-game debug camera, you can actually see the exact layout of this track directly connected to this ending track, and you can even see this doorway right here, proving that we do actually take this exact same track, which I think is really cool. Again, I know I've been bashing about how this game uses teleporting elevators and disconnected areas, but it's things like this that I find extremely cool to figure out. Oh, and I'm also going to bring up this opportunity to go back to what I started this video by saying that the doll hospital has to be exactly where it is, because look, there's another staircase that leads directly to the MCM, so it's not just this one right here, there's also another one right here. It's almost like I put this in the place that it's supposed to be, and it can't be moved. Anyway, I don't want to waste any more time. I still have a lot of building left to do here, so let's just go ahead and get right back into it and finish this build. Yeah, I wasn't joking when I said that this build was going to be a lot. Not only does this span across the entire factory, but it also has so much going on. This is going back to what I was talking about with the CuppaTeaExe tunnels, with them being very tight, compact, and being very bland. This is the opposite of that, where it's still relatively the same types of blocks, but there's actually things going on inside of them. Not just mascot costumes, but also more industrial pipelines. This is a factory after all, and this area right here reminds you of that, because there are a few areas in MCM actually where you do start to forget that this is just one giant factory. This throws you right back into it, because we also start to see some of those molten metal chutes that span across the entire facility. This is what I imagine to be the origin point of all of that, where it gets molten down in the doll factory, and then it comes to this place to then become power to the rest of the facility. But even if all of this is much further away from the factory than it's supposed to be, I still managed to get the rest of it to work together really well. This is probably my favorite of the basements. Not that there's really much competition going on, and due to what happens here, this being the final chase sequence of the game, I'm obviously going to have a bit of bias towards it. But I just really like what's going on here. It once again goes back to the more out there industrial side of things. I don't want to say sci-fi, but it is very exaggerated, I guess. There's still things that you would find in factories, like control rooms and pipes that scatter around the place, but then you have those giant vats of molten metal, a train track underground that goes across the entire facility, whether that be Edwin's personal ride from his house to the factory, or that be the investor ride that we get to see throughout the entire game, where the investors would be able to go through the factory, see a tour of the place, and then decide whether they want to buy into it or not. But by far the biggest, most interesting room is this one right here, and this is just such a out there, such a cool sight to see. There is a giant tube, I think about 11 blocks wide. At the very end of it, there's then that molten lava window at the end, and then there's just multiple pipes outstretching from inside of it that go across the entire room. This is such a weird thing for a FNAF game, but it's just so cool. This is why I've never really minded the sci-fi or exaggerated parts of this series, because yes, it's very different from the original games, but it's just really cool, and being able to build it is just a really nice touch. But then that finally leads us to the chase sequence itself, where I struggled a bit deciding if I wanted to build that first or if I wanted to build that last. I've decided to build it last, obviously, as you can see here, because this does connect back to the MCM eventually, but this is more of those, again, tight and narrow walkways that we actually walk around through. Now, the funny thing about this is that we are probably never going to see any of those rooms. Chances are, most of these rooms you don't even recognize because there is only one path to follow during this chase sequence, and if you end up seeing one of these other rooms, you're most likely going to get jump scared by one of the proto-mimics. So again, it's nice to be able to experience these rooms, whether they actually have a use to them or not. But what's also interesting is that I have to completely change my style of building because at this point in the game, the factory is starting to fall apart and is being consumed by the molten metal. So the first tunnels we went through are clean and open, like how we experienced it going to the factory. But then right here, you can see there are scaffolding, pipes, and wires scattered all around the place. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to just continue the pattern of having this be clean, or if I wanted to just build what we see in game. Obviously, the tunnels that lead to this area eventually do become worn down as well, and I might go back later on to add a switch, whether it can be in its ruined form or if it's in its open form, but for right now I just wanted to take things the easy way by actually building what's seen in game, because this area obviously never has an open side to it. But then this finally leads up to a tunnel that leads back to MCM, which again, I still find really cool how these areas are so far apart from each other, but still find ways to interconnect themselves. Even just figuring stuff like this out only now, even after I've played the game, is still just really cool and might make this build be one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on. I know I've gone on about how things don't connect to each other and get in the way of things, but it's stuff like this that I just can't get over how cool it is and makes this project just so much more fun to put together. I was up until 1 in the morning getting this build done, which is the first time I've done that in this project, but I really wanted to make sure that I got it done so that way the video didn't come out later than it needed to. I always schedule my builds, not only the videos themselves, but I also plan out what I'm going to be building in what day. That way I can get enough done, so that way I can get things done in a set amount of time. But before we actually go inside the build and take a look at all of the details, I just really like the view from up here, just picturing all of this being underneath the main factory, and we have no idea about this. Like, in a few weeks' time, there's going to be a giant parking lot and landscape covering all of this up. So being able to see the entirety of the factory, now almost fully completed by the way. There's only one thing left to do for the factory itself, and that's for the rooftop segments. So we are getting very, very close to this being all completed, and I really like seeing it in its current state. It's really fun seeing how everything stacks on top of each other to form this giant fantasy factory. But let's actually go ahead and take a look at what's going on in here, starting with this entry room where we already have some really nice set decorations around the place. There's some stuff that's from the main factory with storage closets and hanging costumes, which interestingly enough, all of these costumes right here are the ones that we see in Ruin, those being the elephant, the lion, and the bird, not only in their exact color scheme, but it's only those 3 characters as well, which I'm not saying that's intentional or anything, it's just something that I thought was worth bringing up, because while building these things, not only am I just paying attention to the build itself as I'm recreating it, but it is also fun to see some of those smaller details that some people might look over. For all I know, while building these games, I have found some very important pieces of detail that could help explain the lore or whatever. Meanwhile, I'm just placing down some blocks like, oh, yep, this needs to go there, that needs to go there, and I've just completely missed some really important stuff. But that's not my job to do. My job is to explain that this next part right here is where we take the train track to go all the way to the other side of R&D. I'm not sure if this is still technically R&D actually. I believe that's just the FNAF 1 layout over there. But we do eventually make it to this giant room right here, which is where stuff really starts to get interesting, because this is the factory side of things once again. We've got 4 giant vats on each corner of this room here, with 3 stacks of catwalks on top of each other that all lead to different rooms. Of course, we're not able to access this room until much later on in the game, but it's still fun to be able to recreate the path that we take during the chase sequence, where again, even if we're not going to see many of these rooms, we are still still able to walk around the place and see all of the interesting details that are going on. We'll go through the rest of the chase sequence later on, as I want to do things in somewhat of an order, so I'll move on to this room right here, which is one of the control rooms. Now this one I decided to build in its normal form, as this area is actually loaded in when we take the train for the first time, but when we actually get to walk inside this room, that's when all of the pipes and lava starts flowing around the place. So even if there are two different forms to it, I can obviously only build one at a time, and I decided to go with the more upkept side of things. It also just helps to preserve some consistency in the build, as otherwise things are going to stand out much more. However, that leads us to this next room right here, which is probably one of the coolest parts of the entire game. Like, again, there's not much to do here, but the set design in these Steel Wall games is just things I cannot get over. I am really proud of how this one turned out, as even if the block design is very simple, it's how those blocks are used to make these giant pipes that connect to this wall right here, especially with this giant tunnel right here with the molten metal window at the end of it. It is just a very cool place to experience. But let's go ahead and continue on with the chase sequence. So past this first catwalk right here, we then make it to another room, which spirals around the entire cylinder, which then brings us up to the next catwalk. Now this one right here doesn't actually have anything at the end of it, so instead what's going to happen is this catwalk here is going to collapse, then we're able to walk up it and then continue on to this room right here, which is really where all of the ruin starts to show up. The only way to really get through this place is by crawling underneath all of these pipelines, so I'm having to go into spectator mode just so that I'm A, able to go around the place, and B, not get in the way of any of the objects. This does eventually lead to another set of track at the end of the corridor, but before I go back to the MCM, I want to bring up the fact that there is a blocked off tunnel behind it, just like there is on the other side of that room over there. So I can only imagine that this set of track is just one big loop around the entire factory, which makes me think that there must be another set of track that I would guess connects from that room all the way down to the giant room we saw all the way over there. So going all the way up this long track right here, and then even further down this way, I decided to just go along with some more cleaned structures as well. There are some parts in the build where there are scaffolding and falling rocks and rubble along some of the walls. However, since it doesn't actually go for this long, I decided not to continue that pattern and just leave it for the first section over there. Now what I've had to do as well, that you might have noticed during the time lapse, is actually open up these doorways that we see in the doll hospital, as again, it all connects to each other. The ending has this cutoff right here, as we're not actually able to see what's going on there, so instead we take a turn down to this room, which again leads to another set of track behind this doorway right here. So all of it is all connected to each other. There's another doorway right there, which I assume leads to some kind of control room, before we then get off the track itself, go up this staircase, which then finally leads us to the retail showroom. This was definitely the most amount of building I've had to do for a single episode, but it was genuinely really worth it, and I really like the finished result and how things go from one place to another, and I really couldn't just leave it as just the R&D side of things. I really wanted to be able to go from all the way from the stage lift all the way to the elevator that leads up to Edwin's mansion. So even if the main part of the project is coming to its end, there's still some extra areas left to add which are still going to be just as interesting to recreate, and I really cannot wait to get started on them. So make sure that you subscribe to the channel with all notifications turned on, so that way you don't miss out on the rest of the series, and can also help the channel to reach 200,000 subscribers before the end of the year. It's completely free and helps out a whole lot more than you know. But with that being said, thank you everyone so much for watching, and I will of course see you in my next video. Okay, I'm actually just gonna say what's on my mind though. This is so stupid. Why, Steelwell, you have a game planned out ahead of time. There's no way that you can just start building this place and then add a section to another. Surely you had to have had an idea that you were eventually going to lead to hidden corridors and basements that don't collide with other areas in MCM. Surely you should have known that you were going to have to do this eventually, and you would have planned ahead of time so that way one place can lead to another without having 10 teleporting elevators or hidden hallways that don't actually exist. Surely this wasn't just something that you had to figure out as you were going along, right? Whatever, it's done now. It really doesn't matter.